Good evening, dear audience, my dear friends, chicos and chicas, wherever you are. We have our friend here today, James Carden, who is currently at Responsible Statecraft among different organizations. He is producing a lot of high quality papers and opinion pieces. Lovely to always hear his opinions at different outlets. He's been on The Guardian, he's been on different channels, and he provides his perspective. For those of you who don't know, James Carden is a prominent voice in the realist and anti-interventionist foreign policy camp. He is a former advisor to the U.S. State Department's U.S.-Russia Bilateral Presidential Commission and a frequent contributor to Responsible Statecraft and The Nation. So, James, you have a long career, especially in the State Department. You've been busy there. You've written that the State Department has effectively criminalized traditional diplomacy. It's one of those very interesting reads. And I said to myself, well, ever since Iraq, personally for myself, I think I was about 23, the State Department has been basically a warmongering department, has been going into different theaters. And do you agree with that when you say that has effectively criminalized traditional diplomacy? And what do you see the State Department today doing, basically?
So that was probably, I'm guessing, written right before Trump took office. So if my memory serves me right, I was writing about the hysteria involving the accusations that Trump's campaign was in cahoots with the Russian government, simply because certain members of his campaign met with the Russian ambassador in Washington. So it wasn't just the State Department, really, it was the entire Washington establishment that decided in the years between the Maidan Revolution and Trump's campaign, so that's between 2014 and 2016, that any sort of contact with any kind of Russian, whether it be a Russian from the government or a Russian from the private sector or a Russian from the media, was out of bounds. They weren't going to allow that anymore. So that is kind of what happened about a decade ago. And it's led to all the ugliness that I think that, we've been going through ever since.
Wow. It's amazing. I find it really strange that two of the biggest nuclear-powered superpowers in the world rarely talk to each other. And they seem to be talking over each other. They seem to be completely on different wavelengths. So when did this shift from engagement to coercion really begin? Is it something that started already after the fall of Russia, or did it just evolve because Russia was in a weaker state post 90s?
Well, I like the way that you put that. When did it become all about coercion? And I think that you put your finger exactly on the right period of time. It became coercion during the administration of Bill Clinton. After 1992, the election in which Bill Clinton defeated the older President Bush, the United States saw its role as as a tutor, as a big brother in a way to Russia. And Russia was going to do what we wanted. And what we wanted was for Russia to become an American-style free market economy and an American-style democracy. And that those attempts in the 90s didn't end very well. They ended, in fact, with the opposite occurring with the rise of President Vladimir Putin in 1999. So ever since, or because of our failure in the 1990s to turn Russia into something that we wanted, but they didn't want, the Washington establishment has been very bitter, very angry with Russia. And Russia has committed a lot of sins in the eyes of our um, empire builders in Washington. Russia spoke out along with Germany and France against the Iraq War in 2003. Vladimir Putin, in a famous speech in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, said that he was going to pursue a foreign policy based on Russia's interests, not the interests of the United States.
Correct.
Russia then went to war in Georgia for 8 days in August of 2008. That was another great sin in the eyes of the Washington establishment, and on it went. So, we've been trying with very little success to coerce the Russians into acting in a way that they don't want to act. And they don't want to act that way because it doesn't serve their interests. But the problem with the people in Washington is that no other country in the world is allowed to have their own interests. And so that's the problem. And that's the problem that we're facing right now in Ukraine. And
Mm.
one kind of bright spot in the relationship is that at the very least, now, today, literally today, as we're talking, President Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are in Moscow talking to President Putin. So that's actually a very good sign, and one of the better signs, one of the better things that's actually happened between U.S. and Russia over the past 25 years. And I suppose we'll talk about what's going on there later on. But anyway, that's a rather long answer to your initial question.
Mm. Indeed, monumental times, especially today, is that day. There's a lot going on. What do you rate the chances that they're going to walk away with a deal or an agreement or a tacit agreement to move forward um, with the 28? Well, it's maybe 19 now. I don't know the exact figure. Nobody does, I guess. But what do you rate the chances now?
Very little.
Very little.
I don't think there's a very good chance that much is going to get done. I think that the original 26 points were probably unacceptable, or seemed to be at least unacceptable to the Ukrainians. And then our negotiators went over the original set of points with the Ukrainians, and then they turned it into a document that will not be acceptable to the Russians. So what we have is a deadlock. And I think it's important still that our people are sitting down with the Russians. There needs to be, at the very least, communication between these two massive and these two occasionally dangerous, nuclear armed countries. It was a terrible, terrible thing that Joe Biden didn't see any point in speaking to the Russian president for 3.5 years. That was absurd, especially in light of the fact that he was funding a proxy war against Moscow. So,
Correct.
for me, the current thing today is that just talking is the thing, and just the fact that they're there means an awful lot. I don't really see the Russians agreeing to the points as they've been at least publicly seen at this point.
Mm. And it could indeed be because the Russians constitutionally annexed 4 regions, and for them it would require, I suppose, a constitutional amendment. But I guess that can be done. But if Ukraine is belligerent about not giving up any land, and the Europeans seem to be, with their heads in the sand as well, how do you see this rift? Because there is obviously a rift between Washington and Europe about how to go about this. Uh, what are next steps for the Trump administration? Because if these two parties in Europe do not agree to NATO, no territorial concessions, it will never end. It only ends with complete defeat, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably what's going to happen. The war only ends once Russia achieves its aims on the ground. And I think that the Europeans and the role that they've played have been particularly unhelpful. The
Right.
European leadership has, for whatever reason, decided to turn Russia into a dedicated enemy for at least a generation. The anger in
Yeah.
Moscow at the Europeans is even greater, is even more intense at the Europeans than it is at the Americans. So the Europeans have been playing a terribly unhelpful role in solving this crisis because all that they do is encourage Zelensky to be intransigent, and he can and he can't afford to be
Correct.
because the enormous amount of lives that have been lost on the Ukrainian side. So Zelensky, if he were smart, would do what he can to end this thing as soon as possible. But Zelensky is under pressure at home that is very significant from his right flank, from his far right flank.
Mm.
So I think this thing only ends with a Russian victory on the ground, and that the war drags on for at least um, another year through the spring and into the summer of 26.
Yeah, I mean, they are taking increasingly more and more territory, and the lines are crumbling. And it, I mean, the current line is basically quite fragile. And there are certain major towns, if they happen to take Siversk, Hulapole, and a few other towns, they might just get into, barely any lines anymore, and they can advance at a really fast pace. Um, there's a myth that, how do you rate? Okay, I'll put it this way: how do you rate Russian diplomacy currently, as a former um, advisor? How was your interaction with the Russians? How did you find them on a one-to-one interaction or in a diplomatic interaction?
Extremely professional. The Russian diplomatic corps is actually, in my opinion, far more professional than a lot of what I've seen elsewhere. Um, their foreign minister will probably go down as one of the giants of interstate diplomacy in the 21st century.
Right.
We don't have anyone like Sergei Lavrov.
No.
I think that they've done a masterful job. They're stringing Trump and his team along. They're trying not to anger Trump. They're trying to engage, but they're also pursuing um, their war aims.
Mhm.
The Europeans, by comparison, look like fools compared to the Russians with regard to what's going on now. So I think so far they've done quite a marvelous job. And a lot of people in Washington and Brussels talk about how all the sanctions and all this stuff has isolated Russia in the world. It's made Russia a pariah state. Well, that might be true in terms of Western Europe and the United States. It isn't actually true for the rest of the world. Um,
Correct.
so their diplomats have done a superb job keeping the lines open to Asia and the Middle East,
Rest of the
um,
world.
rest of the world. and the rest of the world doesn't share our very, what I think is a very strange view of the Ukrainian crisis. The rest of the global South, for instance, I don't think sees the matter of who governs the Donbass as some sort of existential question. Um, Now, I certainly don't, but I'm a very tiny minority here in Washington. But that's really what this war is about. It isn't about the future of the West or any of these grandiose uh, things. It's about the matter of who governs a territory that for centuries had been governed by the Soviet Union and before that the Russian Empire.
Correct.
So this is really an enormously um, dangerous and provocative overreaction on the part of the United States and its allies in Europe.
And do you see then, because of this rift that's happening, do you see, because Trump did say he would try to end intelligence sharing and potentially weapon supplies, do you see that having a significant disadvantage for Ukraine? I think I do, but you probably have a similar opinion, or?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if Trump decides to end intelligence sharing and targeting information, the war is over. That's it.
Mm.
That's all Trump has to do. So
Mm.
basically, and this has been true even before Trump, it's been true from the very, very beginning. Actually, it's been
Right.
true since 2014, is that the United States has been financing this. We've been propping up the SBU, their security services. We've been funding their military. Without the United States, this thing would have been over a long time ago. And I
Correct.
think that people here don't realize that so much.
Mm.
But that's true. It's every bit as true as when people say Israel wouldn't have been able to carry out their horrific mass murder campaign in Gaza without the financial support of the United States. Absolutely true.
Mm.
So we're in a position where we're backing these two horrible wars,
Mm.
and yet pretending and posing before the world as kind of an exemplar of humanitarian values. It's really, really, really dark.
Yeah, it's quite deranged actually, if you think about it. I mean, yeah, I was listening to Alex Christoforou and a couple of other commentators, and they were talking about the same thing today. They were mentioning the fact that why does Europe and especially America pretend like, okay, we need to now speak to the Ukrainians and we need to speak to the Europeans? They could basically end this in a day, right? Well, technically they could. They could tell Europeans, piss off, nothing to do here anymore. Project Ukraine is over, no NATO, voila. And they could always do that. And I don't know who's stopping them. Is it the war lobby? Is it always the military industrial complex? Senators like Lindsey Graham, who want the fight to continue till the last Ukrainian. So is it people like that who are constantly putting pressure?
Mm. Yes, yes, it's a bipartisan. It's both parties, and both
Yeah.
parties are basically of one mind with regard to these issues. But it's not just the politicians; it's also the media. The leading newspapers in the United States are all pro-war. The leading think tanks in the United States are all pro-war, pro-intervention.
So,
So, in all of the leading candidates for the Democratic presidential nomination next time around in 2028 would all support continuing to support this war in Ukraine. And in fact, Trump and J.D. Vance are outnumbered even within their own party on this matter.
Mm.
Most Republicans in Washington on Capitol Hill
Or
think the way
probably more.
they
Yeah.
they think the way Lindsey Graham thinks. They don't think the way J.D. Vance thinks.
No, that's incredible. And I was speaking to another wonderful journalist. You probably heard of him, Patrick Babb from Germany, and he was saying the same thing. He says that we might have to replace our elites, and it could take a process of 20 to 30 years to get it done, because we seem to have people who are completely oblivious to the human suffering, and they just, make some signatures, make some statements, and this war continues. It's absolutely insane. Do you see, and you said it's bipartisan, and you were advisor to President Obama, if I'm correct, right?
Well, not
No,
under his
under his administration, and
right.
under his administration. And did you ever, does it really help the president when you have such warring factions, or does it confuse the president most of the time what to do? Uh,
Well,
Forward.
I think President Obama campaigned in 2008
Hmm.
against the war in Iraq, and he spoke one way, and then when he got into office, he did basically what he was told by the establishment, by the intelligence agencies, by the Pentagon. Mr. Obama never really put up a fight. The last president really to put up a fight was John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy was murdered in broad daylight in
Hmm.
1963 in November. So um, that, I think, frightened a lot of subsequent presidents.
Mm.
And so Obama, and also, there's a terrible, um, well documented, obviously, history of racial problems in the United States. And I think that Obama was probably, you know, cautious given that he is, African American.
Mm.
So, the president can go in, and if he's really determined, he can try. But a lot of the times it doesn't work out
Mm.
because all of the people around him believe the same thing. And that's what happened to Trump during
Mm.
his first term. And I think it's really happening now in a way too. Trump came in and said he was going to fight the deep state and all that. And then he ends up hiring and surrounding himself with people who believe things like Lindsey Graham. So
That's
it's a
incredible.
very, very difficult thing here. And I think that point that the German journalist made about having to change elites is correct. That's definitely the case in Germany. Um,
Mm.
Germans, I think, are pathetic in their subservience to Washington. I mean, it's
Mm.
really bad. And I think that here we need to begin, a process, a very long process of replacing these pro-war, pro-intervention elites. But it's really, really an uphill battle here because there are so few people in positions that matter who want it to stop. They think that we should be doing this. They're really sincere in it. So
Wow,
it's a real problem.
that's incredible. Um, in your time, you have argued that Ukraine and its Western backers need to come to the realization that the war is lost. We understand that in terms of regaining the 1991 borders. What does the realistic post-war settlement look like to you? And why is, what could be the biggest issues to getting this done? As in, how does it look like, and what are some of the hurdles that could come in the way?
Well, it looks like this. The Russian-speaking oblasts that Moscow has annexed fully become annexed, and they become recognized, internationally recognized parts of Russia. And then there's a bilateral peace treaty signed between Ukraine and Russia. And that's it. I mean, that is really what the Russians are after. They are
Mm.
after these parts of the country that the Ukrainians in the western part of the country um, have abused and have
Correct.
fought and attacked and killed. And no one's going to admit this. Zelensky, least of
No,
all. But the fact of the
absolutely.
matter is that the Russians are giving them what they wanted all along, which was a
That's
Ukraine
true.
Ukraine for the Ukrainians. And so I find this whole thing even more, this war, which is really tragic, even more tragic, because they're fighting over something that they don't want and that
Correct.
they never wanted. And so it's unbelievable to me. What would happen to, let's say that the Ukrainians and the Europeans and the Americans decide to go all in on this and
Mm.
really go to war and try to push the Russians out of the Donbass. What then, and they win, let's just say that they win. What then happens to the ethnic Russian populations in the Donbass? What do you think
Exactly.
happens then? So, this whole thing about, um, the Russians have, are violating our sovereignty, and they're, annexing, our territory. That's a load of crap.
That really is. Yeah. It's
And and I
yeah.
think, people should remember who started this. Did the Russians start it, or did the Ukrainians, who overthrew a democratically elected government in February of 2014, start it?
Correct.
So you overthrow a government, right? You depose the president through a violent coup. I think that those oblasts in Donetsk and Luhansk had every right to secede when they did,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and
And
it's just crazy to me that people refuse to see what it was that happened. The overthrow of a democratically elected president isn't democracy. It's the opposite of that. And liberals in this country get all worked up about January 6th, about the
correct.
attempted coup and all that stuff. Well, let's just do a thought experiment for a second. Let's say the January 6th coup succeeded. Okay? So,
Mm.
guys, they rushed the Capitol, they overthrew the Congress, and they made it so that Trump overthrew the results of the 2020 election and Trump stayed as president. Now, that would be clearly a violation of the election, a violation of the Constitution.
Correct.
Don't you think then that liberals would be all in favor of California and New York seceding from the
Absolutely.
Union? Absolutely.
Yes.
But they don't apply that logic to Ukraine, mainly
Um,
because they don't know what they're talking about, mainly because they've never been there, mainly
correct.
because they've never spoken to a Ukrainian or a Russian. So, these people in Washington think that they're fighting the Second World War. Well, they're not. And speaking of the Second World War, the Russians were the ones who won it. And it was the Western Ukrainians who were Hitler's most bloodthirsty allies. Again, no one in Washington understands this. No one cares. It's all about political posturing. And it's ridiculous. And it's dangerous.
It's ridiculous. It's dangerous, and it spits upon all the sacrifices made in the Second World War. I've been to the graves, to the cemeteries in France. It's a tragic sight. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful resting place for thousands of soldiers. But yeah, it's a surreal moment, and millions of lives were lost, including Indian lives, as part of British Indian Army, almost 2.5 million volunteers fought in different theaters to fight the Axis powers, right? So and we fought also the Nazis. And it's amazing that 4 years into the war, Ukraine has never made an attempt to even, whitewash a certain things about Nazis. I mean, at least get rid of the symbology, get rid of. I mean, we could all agree in 2025 that maybe the Nazis were bad, and then, and get
Well,
rid of some of the symbology, remove the regimental names, just rename them. None of
right.
that marketing effort. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, people also don't realize that Stalin and the Russians were up against 260 German divisions. Do you know
Right.
how many divisions the United States, Canada, and Britain were up against after Normandy? 12.
Yeah, I
So
thought 13. Yeah, 12. Yeah. Yeah.
who did the,
Right.
who did the bulk of the fighting and the dying? It was the Russians. And now now we're on the side of these people who are very proud that their ancestors fought alongside the Nazis and in the process murdered hundreds of thousands of Jews and Poles.
It's incredible.
I don't like it one bit.
Not at all. And nobody ever brings it up in the media. Nobody ever asks them, "Hey, Ukraine, 4 years later, you say there are no Nazis, but you seem to have." Nobody asks these questions. It's
Well,
always like, okay, yeah, we just take it for granted. It's
it's the
amazing.
same thing. It's the same thing with the Estonians and the Latvians and the Lithuanians. No one, no country was a more efficient killer of the Jews than Latvia. No one ever
Mm,
brings that up. It's
mm,
always about Russia. Russia is the great devil. It's we're right back where we were in the 60s and the 50s and 60s and 70s. We're in it. We're right back in the Cold War, and that's a terrible tragedy because it didn't have to be this way. But
really
there
didn't.
are people in this country who insisted on this,
Mm,
and so here we are at a great cost, not of American lives, but at a great cost of Russian and Ukrainian lives, while we sit on the sidelines like a bunch of jackals
it's
funding
incredible.
this. It's terrible. It's disgraceful.
And now we see that it's starting to bite back. Not only, those two tankers that were attacked, the oil tankers, in the Black Sea, and the port in Novorossiysk was actually um, um, shipping oil from Kazakhstan that is actually, funded by the U.S. companies.
Mhm.
So you're starting to see these actions that, provoke Turkey, for example. They didn't like one bit that this was happening in their economic zone. Um, so, do you see other powers getting involved in this? Because I know the Turkish are not happy. There might be other people aside from just Russia who might just be really pissed at Ukraine at some point. Do you see that extending beyond just Russia getting involved?
Not quite yet, not at the moment. I think that Erdogan has been a very cautious player of late.
Right.
So no, I don't think so. I think that basically, I think this thing is winding down. I think that we are entering the final year, but I don't think it's
Mm,
going to be solved with 26 or 28 or 20 or 19-point plans. I think it's
mm,
going to be one on the ground because Ukrainians don't have a leader with any courage. This idea that um, Zelensky is the reincarnation of um, whoever, Churchill or whatever,
oh
um,
no.
it is a load of nonsense. Zelensky himself is to blame in large part for this war. After all, again, this is something that people don't either they don't know or they don't talk about it. Zelensky was elected on a peace platform. He was
Absolutely.
elected over Poroshenko because he promised to end the war.
Correct.
And when he got into office and he said that he was going to follow the Steinmeier formula, which was part of the Minsk process, he was met with violent protests in the streets from people saying,
Right.
no, we don't want to give the people in the Donbass who are Russians and who we hate any autonomy. So anytime that Zelensky said, look, we're going to hold a vote on autonomy for the Donbass in keeping with the Minsk process, he was threatened. He was threatened
Right.
by his military, by the far-right militias. They threatened his wife. They took to the streets.
Correct.
That's how much the people in Western Ukraine hate the people in Eastern Ukraine. And they hate the people in Eastern Ukraine because they're ethnically Russian. That's the story. And so, Zelensky, because he's not a statesman, he's a television comedian, couldn't take the heat.
Right.
So he couldn't follow through on it. So then what he did was he came running to Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam, all Uncle Sam wants to do is hurt Russia. And so it was a perfect match. And so in November, then Biden comes in November of 2021, they signed the U.S.-Ukrainian Strategic Charter at the State Department, right? That was a document that said we are going to pursue military interoperability with the armed forces, the American armed forces, and NATO, right? Then the Russians in December of 2021 send over a draft of a peace treaty. And the treaty says, look, don't expand NATO. Don't put your troops on the territory of the former Soviet Union, and we'll be good. And the Biden administration, they couldn't do it. The Europeans, NATO, they couldn't do it. They refused to do it. And then Putin decided that, well, he had no other choice, and he invaded in February of 2022. But the Russians sent over a reasonable document in December of 2021, and it wasn't even considered. Okay? Well, the counselor to Secretary of State Antony Blinken is a man named Derek Chollet. And Chollet came up through the German Marshall Fund and has had, positions along the way under Obama. Chollet's the counselor to Blinken. And in an interview, the interviewer asked Chollet, says, when the Russians sent the draft treaty over, what did you do? And Chollet says, we didn't even consider it.
That's incredible.
So it's incredible. So at no point were we willing to sit down and actually take Russia's concerns seriously. Right. So there's a lot of blame to go around. I'm not saying that Putin was right to invade, not back the war, but there's a lot of blame to go around. There were a lot of missed opportunities.
Yes, and he had been really warning it since 2007. I mean, absolutely. At some point you have to, dig in your heels and understand, or try to make an effort to understand. Put yourself in the shoes of a little thing called the Cuban Missile Crisis, and think just a bit. Just have to do a little, I don't know, National Geographic, watch some history lessons, and you might see, okay, maybe it's time to negotiate and do something about it. Do you now see with Russia and this whole missed opportunity for 4 years, if this attempt to end the war succeeds, right? So that would mean a completely new dimension with Russia. That's a big if. We are not sure it happens, but if it does, on the off chance that it does, do you see sanctions being lifted? Do you see Russia paying some part in reparations? Because I think the Russians have shown themselves to be quite reasonable, at least when it comes to negotiations. So do you see them, saying, okay, we could do some reparations, okay, we can do some, joint reconstruction, things like that?
I think it's possible, but there's going to have to be a change in Kiev.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so if Trump is in, or if Vance, follows Trump, I think that the Americans would probably encourage that. I don't know where the Europeans are. I think they've totally lost it. But it would have to take a change in Kiev. You couldn't have this current setup. But I
No.
think that that's possible. But right now, I think there's a tough year ahead um, with this
Of
war.
fighting.
I don't think that this is going to. Do not foresee
Mm.
Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner getting off a plane in Washington in a few days saying that there's peace in our time. I don't think that that's going to happen.
Okay, yeah, that's quite ambitious. You are dealing with the Russians. It's not a cakewalk, that's for
Right.
sure. They're giants when it comes to diplomacy and negotiations. So, and I know this. I was born in India, living in Belgium for the last 25 years, but we knew back then, even while living in India, that Russia was always a negotiator. I mean, India buys a lot of its military hardware from Russia. We have flankers, we have S-400 air defense systems, tanks, and so forth. But during every deal, regardless of the fact that they were still strategic partners, we always would haggle. You would have an Indian and a Russian haggling for price, for technology, for all these different things. So Russians are very good in negotiating, I think. And do you see um, the war potentially spreading outside Ukraine? Because the closer it gets to a finale, let's say, the more dangerous some things can get. Ukraine could try something. There have been a lot of false flags. There have been a lot of NATO supposed incursions into Poland and things like this with drones. Do you see that increasing as well?
I don't. I think that.
Oh, you
Well, well, let me put it this way. Do I think that there are going to be more attempted false flags? Yes. Do I think that they're going to work? No, I don't. Because I think that the Europeans are all talk, and they're not
right.
going to. They're not going. They're not going to fight. And frankly, I don't believe that Trump and Vance will allow them to. There's not a lot that they can actually do um,
Correct.
without our support. And so I don't think that that's going to happen, but I would expect there to be definitely an uptick in these drone stories and these airspace violation stories and the rest of
Mhm.
it. But no, I'm actually fairly confident that it's not going to spread beyond where it is.
Mm. So the Europeans, it seems like, and I'm hoping that this happens because I would like personally the war to end. As a normal human being, I hate the suffering that is put upon the Russian and the Ukrainian people.
Yeah.
The people. I'm not talking about the regime. I'm not talking about the governments. They have gone through hell. Russia is paying a price. Do you think the rate of attrition favors Russia or Ukraine at this moment, or is it because a lot of people say it's 1-1, 1-5? Do you think it's more of a Russian? Uh,
I don't think it's anywhere close. The numbers that I've heard are 36-1. So
yeah.
no, it's not even close. The Ukrainians are being worn down by Russia's war of attrition. Um, the 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 comparison that comes to mind, and this is from a very well respected military analyst in the United States who taught at the Naval War College and at Johns
Hmm.
Hopkins. His name's Dr. Michael Vlahos. And he says that the numbers of dead that the Ukrainians have suffered during this war are comparable on a per capita basis to the lives lost by France in the First World War. So what you're looking at today with Ukraine is basically you're going to have a lost generation of people in Ukraine because of this war. But not only, Ukrainian casualties are probably close to or over 1 million. But then you have the refugees, and the refugees aren't going to come back.
No.
Ukraine's population at the end of the Cold War was something on the order of 53 million, if I'm not mistaken. Some estimates now have Ukraine's population at half of that. So basically, what Washington, what President Obama and President Biden did through their endless support for the Galician nationalists in the Ukrainian West was to transform this country into a supersized Kosovo. That's what we're looking at. You're looking at a place that is going to be defined by no hope, no jobs, black market arms dealing, prostitution, crime. It is going to be a very, very serious regional security problem for Eastern Europe. People are not thinking about that, but they ought to start, because the amount of arms, the amount of money that we've put into this place is going to come to no good end for Ukraine. Ukraine as a state is teetering on the brink of collapse. That is not a good thing. It is not a small place like Kosovo. It is a very, very big place. And half of its population is gone.
Correct.
And it's not going to be welcomed into the EU. That's another thing that people lie about all the time. It will not be in the EU. It will not be in NATO. So what you're looking at is Kosovo on steroids. That is not good for Europe. And these European leaders, and it's a horrible crop of people leading Europe at the moment, particularly the British and the German leadership. So you're going to be facing a terrible regional security problem in the aftermath of this war. And that's something that people need to start thinking about. And they need to start thinking about it now. They need to stop dreaming about defeating Russia. It's not going to happen.
Because, yes, and many people may not know this, at least 7 million Ukrainians have left Ukraine into the European Union since the war escalated in 2022, and at least 2 additional million went to Russia. So Russia actually gained people. So, well, they have some casualties, but they're able to absorb them a lot better. And if Russia were to dial up this war, because if indeed these actions where we target the shadow fleet, where we target deeper into Russia, or more, maybe they start to attack the Kremlin, and I don't know what they have in their mind, this might get quite hefty at some point. Does that mean that we could be looking at a new set of migration from Ukraine, because there might still be people who might try to run away? Do you see something like that happening as well, if this gets worse?
Of course, it's happening as we speak. The Ukrainians are not meeting their recruitment levels. Men of fighting age are leaving constantly. They're in hiding. No, this is going to go on until the war ends. But no one seems to be thinking about that. Instead, you have these people like the president of the EU Commission, like Keir Starmer, like Mers, who are dreaming of a Russian defeat instead of looking squarely at what's happening in Ukraine, which is the slow motion disintegration of a country. And it's a terrible tragedy. and it's such a tragedy because it never had to happen.
It's incredible. And it could reasonably be ended if they came to two key things: lose some of their territory and basically not join NATO. The Russians might even cave on letting them having maybe a 500,000 army just to be there, and then some sort of trilateral security arrangements. But
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned the army size,
yeah,
and I think that's important to talk about for a second, because
right,
that was one of the 26 points or whatever that Ukraine was going to be able to hold on to an army of 600,000 men.
right,
Okay, first of all, 600,000 men. That would make it twice the size of the largest army in Europe now, right? It would make it twice the size of the armies of, I believe, Italy and France. It would make it 3 times the size of, or more than the army in Germany and Spain.
correct.
Those countries, unlike Ukraine, happen to have money. So I don't know how they think that Ukraine, which is broke and destroyed, is going to be able
To
to field
sustain.
and sustain an army of 600,000 men.
Oh
It's
yeah,
absurd.
we are paying for that, obviously. They are not expecting that at their own dime. Of course, the Europeans will be shelling out all the money like suckers for the last many years now. Um, the the thing is, yes, will they even have 600,000 men left at that point? Because everyone 22 till the age of 60 plus, I believe, are mobilized. So I don't know if you just need to mobilize 18 to 22, I guess. But yeah, all your male population is being decimated. It's
Yeah,
tragic.
it's terrible. It absolutely is terrible.
And so if Ukraine needs to, let's say, evolve, get out of this in the best situation, I would suggest they sign this deal. I think it doesn't get better than this for them. Do you see um, some sort of compromise here from the Russians, or not at all? Do you see that no, we want those four regions, we go for it, or something like this?
No, I don't think there's a compromise there. Putin isn't, that would be a humiliation for
Okay.
Putin, having annexed the land. They would have to go back, change the constitution. I don't see that happening. They too have lost a lot of men in this war. So no, I don't see that happening.
Yes, it's quite difficult to give somebody who's already crushing the other party on the battlefield some sort of advice as to what is going to happen. I don't think they will be taking terms on this topic. Um, and Putin is also traveling to India normally in 2 days, so he is busy with his allies in India. How do you see with the tariffs that Mr. Trump placed on India? Um, I personally, I thought that was a good thing for India because that said, okay, we can be self-reliant. We're a country of 1.5 billion. Let's not worry about this, right? But they burned some bridges when they put those heavy tariffs for buying Russian oil. Do you see India coming back to better terms with the US, or do you think India is going to drift away slowly into its own corner and stay
And
there?
yeah, I think India is going to do what India has traditionally done, which is look out for Indian interests. They did that during the Cold War. They were obviously, as you know, the leader of the non-aligned countries. So
Correct.
this is very much in the Indian diplomatic tradition. I think
Right.
that Trump is basically going to have to, at some point, fold on these tariffs. They're hurting the American economy. And again, it's a big world. The Russians know that. The Indians know that. We're hardly the only game in town. And that's
Right.
something, again, that the people all around me here in Washington don't really understand, but it's something that people in New Delhi and in Moscow understand very well.
Yes, it's true. It seems to me that they have just a completely different level of diplomacy and understanding of each other. When I look at Western leaders and I wonder what's going on, it's not even in the same ballpark. I find it quite difficult. Okay, I see there are some. Rubio can be on and off, pretty okay, but yeah, I prefer somebody who's capable of long-term diplomacy, building bridges, making things work. Do you see Russia being welcomed eventually back into the European fold after this war ends? Because if they're going to clobber Ukraine and at some point Ukraine gives way and I don't know, they manage to take those four territories. I'm not going to go into Odessa and all those other topics because it's possible that they get there. But that would require some sort of second round of mobilization. It's not something that they could pull off easily, and they would have to pay a heftier price for it, of course. But do you see these Russia coming back to Europe in a way in I don't know 5 years, or do you think it could take another 20 before we have this stable situation with Russia?
I think it's a generation. I think it's 20. I think
Oh
that
my.
I think you'll have to wait. I think that we'll have to wait until Vladimir Putin leaves Earth. Um, I I don't see that. I don't see that happening. And I don't think that the European. I don't think the Russians. I think that they've basically reoriented their economy and their statecraft elsewhere, and they're not going to wait on the Europeans anymore, any more
Hmm.
than the Turks are waiting on the Europeans. Remember, for decades, the Turks were waiting on an invitation to Europe. It never came.
Hmm.
Erdogan has reoriented Turkish statecraft elsewhere. And I think that the Russians are doing that. Um, the Europeans and the Americans, our problem is that we're very self involved. And we think that the world means North America and Europe. And that's a mistake. And so, no, I don't think so. I think that relations between Europe and Russia are probably, um, damaged for a very long time. And I think that relations between the United States and Russia have to, at some point, go back to where they were in the um, early 2000s, because um, not for any ties of culture or fondness, but simply because of our military and nuclear status. So we have to have some sort of open channel of communication with each other. The Europeans are basically, their behavior during this period of the Russia-Ukraine war is basically going to, they're consigning themselves to irrelevance for a very long time, I think.
Yes, I mean they try so hard not to be relevant anymore by doing completely the opposite things, the asinine things. But it's also when it comes to economics, it comes to taxation. We're extremely heavily taxed. We're extremely overregulated. Businesses come to die in Europe. Millionaires leave Europe. It's a sad situation because actually, you know, au contraire, there's actually a lot of beautiful things about Europe. When I came here
Oh,
25 years ago,
yeah,
it was a magnificent place. It still is. And I love traveling here. And we do have certain basics like, okay, lower cost healthcare. I'm not going to call it free because we pay a lot of taxes, people.
right.
but but yeah, it's subsidized healthcare. We have certain freedoms. We do have quality food. At least it's better than it was in America, right? Hopefully, Mr. Kennedy will change that around with his FDA policies and food policies. But we have a lot of great things in Europe, decent education and all these things, and we seem to just turn our heads into the sand for certain things when it comes to bureaucracy, when it comes to expansion. They keep talking about Moldova and Georgia and all these countries into Europe. Do you see that causing us problems? Because they're constantly looking for expansion, at least the European Union.
Yeah, I think they need to really grow up. I think that the German ambassador's behavior in Georgia has been disgraceful, almost as disgraceful as our own behavior has been. The idea that, Georgia is, part every bit of as part of Europe as Holland is stupid. I mean, it's a former republic of the Soviet Union. Tbilisi is a wonderful place. I
Mm,
highly recommend it, but it isn't Europe. And so
right.
and basically they want to use these places, these former republics of the Soviet Union, as ways at getting at Russia. Well, the Georgians understand this, and they reject it. They don't want to be used in this manner. And so, the days of the Eastern Partnership, which was the brainchild of Carl Bildt and Radek Sikorsky, those days are over.
Mm.
And the war in Ukraine is basically Russia sending a message to the United States and to the European Union, to butt out. And I think that we would be wise to do so. And it doesn't help these people that we claim that we're trying to help. How did any of this help Ukraine? It
No one
didn't.
bit. No
And
one bit.
not one bit. And so, using places like Georgia to get at the Russians um, is a very um, narcissistic and cruel and pointless thing to do. And the Georgians don't want any part of that. I know that. I know that for sure because
Mm.
I've talked to a lot of Georgians and I've been there, and they don't want any part of this nonsense. And they're right.
And they do this while they have so many issues domestically, including the United States. And maybe we'll end with this one last question. How's it going right now? Because we see there's a lot of deportations, there's a lot of chit chat about immigration. How is social life in America at this moment?
Well, it's
New
it's
York.
not so it's not so good. I mean, I'm in an office right now that is 2 blocks away from where the 2 National Guard volunteers were shot and one was killed last week.
Right. Right.
It the cities are um, very tense. People are angry about the cost of living. Um, Many people are very angry about the deportation policies, the way that the administration has handled the incompetent way that the administration has handled this. They're deporting American citizens on accident. Um, and then we have this possible war with Venezuela under false pretenses because Venezuela, allegedly, exports fentanyl into the United States when there's no evidence at all that they do that. No
Mm.
fentanyl goes through Venezuela.
Correct.
None.
It comes
From
from
China,
China, if I know.
China in through Mexico. So and now we have reports that the Secretary of Defense is just deciding to, murder people on boats in the Caribbean. Um, the administration's a mess. Donald Trump brought in with him. Um, the only way I could describe it is to use words that he would use, which is to say that he brought in and surrounded himself with really stupid people and incompetent people. And basically, this is the government that he's given us. And I was quite anxious. I didn't vote for either Trump or Biden, but
Mm.
I was quite anxious to get over, to be done with the Biden years. I thought that Joe Biden was one of the worst presidents that we've ever had. Um, And I didn't think Donald Trump was a particularly good president, but I thought that he was better than Biden. But this second go around with him has been really, really bad. And the way that he comports himself, the way that he speaks to um, the media, the way that he speaks to other members of Congress, and then the foolish people that he's appointed to very high positions like Pete Hegseth, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. His
Mm.
approval rating is, I think, the last I saw, 36%, which is extremely low. So I think Americans are ready to move on already from Trump too. So we'll have to see what the next few years brings. But it isn't a country that is um, optimistic at the moment, and it's a different country than the one that I grew up in, and that to me is it's very sad. It's very sad.
Wow. Times are changing, and these are very challenging times. And let's not kid ourselves. Regardless of who's in power, diplomacy takes a lot of effort. Running cities efficiently takes a lot of effort. Takes the effort of people like you and I. And but unfortunately, we are being led by terrible people currently. Certainly in Europe, at least in the United States, for a lot of things manage a bit better, I think. But Mr. James, thank you so much. You have been wonderful to speak to. I hope our audience in Europe, America, wherever you are, enjoyed this conversation with James. It was really wonderful to hear his perspective. You can find James's articles on responsible statecraft. Links will be in the description. Thank you once again, James, and I hope we can have you over. If you're ever in Belgium, you're free to join us. We'll take you out for a beer. Um, if not, I hope to talk to you another time in a few weeks or in a few months. I will reach out to you. But thank you again for your time. I hope this was fun for you as well.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate you having me. It was very nice to talk to you.
All
Take
right, thank you. So I will share with you the recording once it's edited, and I'll post it on our channel. And thank you again for your time, James. I wish you
Thank
a
you.
lovely afternoon. It's still afternoon, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's barely. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye bye.